Today on Capturing Christianity, we're talking about a book, God of the Big Bang, written by Dr. Leslie Wickman. And she's got a PhD. She's also an astronaut. You guys got to hear this, just the little blurb about her on the back of the book. Let me just read it out to you. Former Lockheed Martin corporate astronaut, rocket scientist, and engineer on NASA's Hubble Space Telescope and International Space Station programs, Leslie Wickman, PhD, is currently chair of engineering and computer science, as well as director of the Center for Research in Science at Azusa Pacific University. Stanford University-educated Wickman also works as a research scientist with government think tanks on technical and political aspects of national aerospace and defense issues. She is an internationally respected research scientist, engineering consultant, and international speaker. Leslie lives in Los Angeles, California. I have the pleasure of welcoming her onto Capturing Christianity. Leslie, it's great to have you here. We actually have a mutual friend, Josh Rasmussen. He's the one who put us in touch. And I just love Josh so much, but it's great to have you on the show. I can't wait to talk about your book.
Thanks, Cameron. It's great to be here with you today.
Yeah, well, why don't we start with in March of 2014? Actually, before we do that, is there anything that the blurb on the back of the book, is there anything that we need to know about you that is not contained here that I read off?
I don't know. I kind of think you said it all, but I actually am currently working at Biola University. So, to some people in the Southern California Christian college community, that might be an important change. Azusa Pacific and Biola are kind of seen as rivals. So, we probably ought to make that clear.
All right. Well, I also wanted to ask you about your background too. So, like, did you grow up in a Christian home where your parents did they like cultivate the life of the mind in you guys growing up? How was
Yeah,
it? How was it like?
absolutely. Yeah, so I did grow up in a Christian home, and so, that involved, church and Sunday school pretty much every week, being involved in various aspects of the church, whether it was choir or vacation Bible school. For me, it meant making a faith commitment fairly early on. And it's definitely something that was a big part of our home life.
Yeah, and so I wanted to mention this too. I had the book up at the very beginning of this interview, but I've got it linked in the description of this. If you'd like to pick it up for yourself and give it a read, I highly recommend picking it up. There's a chapter in here. Is it chapter 7? Yeah, it was undoubtedly my favorite. We'll get to that chapter a little bit later on in the interview. But let's start with a blog post that you wrote. In 2014, you wrote an opinion editorial for CNN provocatively titled, "Does the Big Bang Breakthrough Offer Proof of God?" And it kind of went viral, receiving over 500,000 views in less than a week. And then in the editorial, you wrote that, quote, "Science and faith are not in an either-or competition." So I wanted to see if you could expand on that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what I mean by that is that people don't have to choose between science and faith as polar opposites. It's very possible for a person to be both a faithful Christian as well as a top notch scientist. And there are lots of examples in our country and abroad of people who have done just exactly that. In fact, a fairly recent poll showed that upwards of 60% of practicing scientists in the United States self identify as Christian. And that's not something that you hear on the news very often.
Yeah, it's not. And I mean, was there any part, like when you were growing up, was there anything that you came across where you were like, maybe this does actually conflict? Or in your studies, did anything come up where you were like, maybe this does conflict
Yeah.
actually with my faith?
Yeah, actually, to kind of go back a little bit more to my family of origin, my dad had a telescope when I was growing up. And so we used to go out on clear starry nights and look at the stars and the moon and the planets. And that coupled with our faith commitment and church involvement very, very solidly impressed me as a young person of God's God's hand in creation, and that God is responsible for all of the wonder that we studied. But I went to secular schools from grade school all the way through grad school, and heard over and over again in my science classes that you know, what we'd be studying in science class would not necessarily go along with what we were learning in Sunday school and church. And so actually my first encounter of that nature came in junior high school and my biology class. And the teacher was a self-proclaimed atheist, and he would go so far as to say, you know, you might as well just leave your faith at the door when you come in my classroom, because what we'll be talking about here will almost certainly contradict what you've learned at church and Sunday school. And so, you know, here I am, what, 12 years old, I think, in seventh grade, you know, and not quite sure what to do with that, you know, kind of this strange dichotomy that basically he was trying to say that, you know, what we'd be learning through science was going to contradict what the Bible taught. And that honestly didn't make sense to me. Even at that age, I was like, well, how can um, what we learn about God's creation contradict what we know about God himself as the creator? You know, and so I just was, you know, even at that age, I was like, this just doesn't make sense to me. If God truly is the creator, then how can his creation contradict who he is? And so, you know, it was a difficult season of life for me as, you know, like I say, a little junior high kid trying to wrestle with this on my own without a whole lot of resources to draw from. But looking back on it, I'm grateful that that happened when it did, because I feel like it kind of set me on the path at a very young age of trying to figure out for myself how science and faith fit together, and kind of reading everything I could get my hands on, and, you know, talking to people when they were open to it. And I think it went a long way toward kind of helping me to work through that, you know, kind of the whole, you know, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, and make it your own.
Well, why don't we get into some of the evidence then that you think, some scientific evidence that you think actually does provide some evidence for the existence of God? And we're kind of skipping ahead in the outline that I sent you, but let's talk about the Big Bang. I mean, that's the title of your book, God of the Big Bang. Do you think that the Big Bang provides evidence for the existence of God, or would you put it in different words?
Yeah, no, I actually do. I think that, you know, the Big Bang model of the universe is much more God friendly than the theory that was possible or was popular before that, which was the steady state theory. When the steady state theory basically said that the universe and everything has always existed. So, in terms of philosophy or logic, that the universe was self-existent. Whereas the growing evidence for the Big Bang being a more accurate model um, shows that the universe had a beginning. And from the standpoint of logic and philosophy, if anything begins to exist, then it must have a cause for its existence. So if the universe, with the evidence that are uh, gathering for the Big Bang model, is expanding and continuing to expand, then at some point it must have been smaller, which leads to the kind of the singularity point of the universe, and then a Big Bang expansion event. So if it began to exist rather than having always existed, then it must have a cause for its existence. So something that caused it to come into existence, which sounds very much like Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth from something that didn't exist before. So again, I believe that that simple fact that the Big Bang model points to a beginning of the universe makes it much more God friendly. But beyond that, there's a lot of fine tuning within the Big Bang event itself that allows for, in the expansion of the universe, given the expansion rate as well as the mass density of the universe, it allows for the possibility of galaxies and stars and solar systems forming. So there's a lot of fine tuning, even though a lot of times when we talk about the Big Bang, people just tend to think of it as this chaotic explosion. It wasn't chaotic at all. It was finely tuned in terms of being just the exact rate, the exact mass density that's needed to actually be able to form galaxies, stars, solar systems, and planets that could harbor life.
So there's two things that you've talked about so far, two different aspects of the universe that are that provide some evidence for the existence of God. On the one hand, we've got the beginning of the universe, the Big Bang, and then we've also got the fine tuning of the universe. And I want to try to keep those separate because in chapter 7, again, my favorite chapter of the book, I have a question that I wanted to ask you about that one, or really just kind of get a more broad summary of it. But turning back to this first piece of evidence, which is from the beginning of the universe, some atheists have said that, oh, well, we have actually examples of things coming into existence without causes, and so, like virtual particles out of some kind of like quantum foam. So quantum mechanics is supposed to give some kind of counterexample to this sort of general principle that everything that begins to exist has a cause. And I think that you said something along the same lines as like, whenever we see something begin to exist, usually it has a cause that is associated with it. And so in the case of the Big Bang, if something, if the universe itself was to come into existence or began to exist, then that too would have to have a cause.
Right.
But what these atheists are saying is that, oh, actually we have a counterexample to this principle. We have virtual particles coming to existence out of nothing, and they just kind of are there, and there's no really explanation of why they're there. They just happen. And so what would you say to someone who wants to use like quantum mechanics as a kind of counterexample to
Right.
the principle that
Well,
you're relying on here?
first of all, I'd say where'd the quantum foam come from? And where did the principles of quantum mechanics come from as well? So the thing about the universe itself basically coming into existence not out of pre-existing matter, not out of something that pre-existed. So something outside of space, time, matter, and energy must have caused the universe to come into existence. When you're talking about quantum foam and quantum mechanics, you're talking about pre-existing material. So yeah, I mean there are all kinds of subtleties that people can argue. In fact, I mean there's also the speculation that well maybe our universe is one of a series of universes, right? That
The
uh,
multiverse.
either the multiverse or this kind of sequential Big Bang Big Crunch series, right? With one universe almost being recycled.
Is that
Um,
Roger Penrose's the
I
CCC model or something like that? The oscillating.
Oscillating universe. It might be Penrose. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but many people have talked about the possibility of the oscillating
Mhm.
universe or a multiverse. Um, uh, so yeah, there are a lot of different permutations, and again, all of this, even the Big Bang model itself. Um, we're speculating about what the very beginning was. We're saying, okay, we see evidence of an expanding universe, expanding space-time continuum, and we've got a lot of cosmological theory around exactly how that all came to be. So we were never no one there were no observers to actually say exactly how that happened at the beginning. Whether we can't rule out the possibility of an oscillating universe or multiverse, but the so from that standpoint, I believe that the fine tuning evidence is some of the most convincing, compelling evidence for God involved in all of this. There's certainly other discoveries, and we can circle back to the fine tuning if you'd like, or we can talk a little bit about some of the other things that comport well with a biblical worldview. For
Yeah,
example,
I
No,
was
go
going to
ahead.
say, let's turn back to fine tuning, if you don't mind. That was my
Sure.
favorite chapter in the book was chapter 7. Can you just give us an idea of like what? Because I want people to pick up the book and read it, so don't tell us everything that's in the chapter, but give us an
Sure.
idea. I mean, you touched on it briefly a little while ago, but just give us a taste of
Yeah.
what people can expect if they pick up the book and read that chapter.
Yeah, exactly. So it basically touches on the fine tuning principle, or which is alternately known as the Goldilocks principle or the anthropic principle. It's essentially the observation that there is a long and even growing list of universal attributes that appear to have been finely tuned within a very narrow range of values in order to get the universe that we did, that is biofriendly or biophilic. It offers the possibility of supporting life, and so in investigating the probabilities of each of those values being exactly what they are, we realize very quickly that it's extremely improbable that all of these features would be just exactly what they are, uh, but from random chance. Um, so, these things are things like, the strength of the universal gravitational constant, the ratios of the various subatomic forces, the strong nuclear force, the strong and weak forces, uh, the speed of light, and then it goes into kind of some more values that would have to do with what I mentioned before around the mass density of the universe, the expansion rate of the universe. Um, but all of these things have to be very finely tuned within a narrow range of values in order to get the universe that we have, where the exact chemical bonding occurs. Even atom and molecule building has to have these parameters exactly as they are in order to get the universe that we have. So yeah, for example, if the strong nuclear force, which is the force that holds all of the nucleons in the nucleus of an atom together, the neutrons and the protons, were different. Let's say that, well, just to give you kind of a baseline, the strong nuclear force is the strongest force that we know of, but it's only good for the average distance that spans the diameter of the nucleus of a stable atom. Okay, beyond that distance, it doesn't just taper off like gravity does or the electromagnetic force does, but it goes from being the strongest force we know of to zero at the end of that distance. And so it dictates how big of a nucleus of an atom we can have. Okay. If that
That's
force
interesting.
were,
I didn't know that. I mean, I'm getting a picture in my head of like an atom where all the different elements are held together, and then you say after like a certain distance, it just drops to zero. Like you said, it
exactly,
doesn't just taper off to like gravity where it
exactly.
just gets lesser and lesser. That's interesting.
Yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
even know that.
So if you think about it, you've got, the protons that are packed together in the nucleus are charged positively. So as soon as you put even two protons together, they want to repel each other, right? Two positively charged
Mm-hmm.
protons are going to want. So you go from hydrogen with one proton in the nucleus to helium with two protons, and you've got that electromagnetic force repelling the protons away from each other. But then the strong nuclear force kicks in basically and overcomes that electromagnetic repulsion between the protons. But when you get to a certain size of an atom, the strong nuclear force, like I say, once you get to a certain size, it basically goes to zero. And so if you have too many protons in the nucleus of an atom, it's going to start to fall apart. And that's what we call radioactive decay.
Hmm.
And so that's essentially why at a certain size of nucleus with a certain number of protons in it, you go to these radioactive elements. And so imagine, though, that this strong nuclear force were good for longer distances, okay? Then you would, I mean, if you kind of extrapolate, and the extreme of that would be every proton and neutron in the entire universe would be stuck together in one gigantic mass, right? So that's kind of one extreme. And the other extreme is where you have a very weak, strong nuclear force that doesn't allow you to have anything more complex than a hydrogen atom. It's very difficult to build a universe that's friendly to life with only hydrogen, right? Um, and
And this
so
is just one example of one.
this is just one example, exactly, exactly. In fact, another example closer to home is the strength of gravity on Earth. Okay, so the size of a planet gives rise to the amount of local gravity field. Okay, so planet Earth has gravity that is strong enough to hold on to large amounts of water vapor, which is essential for life, as well as for the cleansing water cycle that Earth has. Okay, so if you remember from high school chemistry, the molecular weight of water is 18 grams per mole. Okay, and Earth's gravity is just strong enough to hold on to large amounts of water vapor, which is essential for life, and not quite strong enough to hold on to large amounts of methane and ammonia at 16 and 17 grams per mole, which are deadly gases. So there's just another example. I mean, the list goes on and on and on in terms of how finely tuned all of these different parameters are throughout the universe, as well as in our galaxy, in our solar system, and our planet, in order to get life. And it's you start looking at how incredibly improbable it is for just even a handful of these to be exactly what they are. And then you extend that to the whole list, and it's well beyond the point where statisticians would say it's not just statistically improbable, but statistically impossible.
So going back to like thinking through some objections to this argument, one objection, because you talk about like the Goldilocks principle as that it's applied to Earth. So there's very specific things about Earth that make it habitable for life. But some people will say, well, look, there's billions and billions of galaxies. Like it's inevitable we're going to have one planet that can sustain life. So in a sort of similar way, someone might object to the fine-tuning argument with the multiverse hypothesis and say, well, there's all of these different universes that have just been popping out of this multiverse generator that we don't really know much about. But let's just assume that one exists, and then we get all these different universes, and that's how we explain the fine-tuning of the universe, the strength of the strong nuclear force, strength of gravity, and all of these other different examples that you can rattle off. Like the fact is that there's all these different universes. They've got different constants and quantities in them, and so how is this, in your mind, is this the best objection to fine-tuning, or do you think that there's a better one? But in any case, I'm interested to hear your response to it.
Yeah. No, it's definitely the most popular objection to the fine-tuning principle. And it depends on how you look at it. I mean, Paul Davies, who's a astrophysicist from Arizona State University, has a fantastic quote in response to the multiverse hypothesis and how it stands as a possible example of, how you could get a universe like what we have. And he says something to the effect, it's a long quote, and so I'm not going to get the whole thing exactly right, but essentially he says that to rely on the possibility of there being a multiverse for which we have absolutely no evidence or access, to explain the universe that we do observe seems the antithesis of Occam's razor. It's an infinitely complex explanation. And so the idea of, we're appealing to this concept that we have no evidence for and can't possibly observe to try to explain these features of the universe that we do observe. It's not exactly a strong argument. so so again, it's completely speculative, but certainly it is the best quote unquote objection to the fine tuning principle that there is, which kind of tells you that the fine tuning argument is a really strong one.
Hmm. So, going back to another earlier part of the interview, you were mentioning that you had some other pieces of evidence that you wanted to cite that sort of affirm the biblical worldview.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of things I could refer to. I guess one of the ones that I like to refer to is in string theory. String theory uh, speculates that there may be a larger number of dimensions in our universe than what we experience on a day-to-day basis. So we regularly experience 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. But it turns out that our observational evidence on the expansion of the universe, uh, it fits better mathematically, as when it's modeled mathematically, it fits better if we use 10 or 11 dimensions instead of just the 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time. So if you think about the fact that we normally experience only 1 dimension of time, and not even a dimension of time that can go forward and backward, but just a kind of unidirectional dimension of time that moves one direction forward, um, and the 3 dimensions of space, then imagine if, as is speculated in string theory, that there may be extra dimensions of not only space, but possibly time too. If you imagine 2 dimensions of time, in other words, a plane as opposed to a line, um, that provides a model where an entity could be, if they have access to those 2 dimensions, everywhere at once. And again, this takes me back to a biblical perspective that God is omnipresent. He's omniscient, he's omnipresent, and he can be everywhere at once within that model. So I love the fact that kind of at the cutting edges of physics, we see this increasing compatibility between science and a biblical worldview. Another area is quantum mechanics that you mentioned earlier. And quantum mechanics took us from a very deterministic perspective on nature, where everything is fairly cut and dried, cause and effect. One thing causes another, very predictive. Um, so it took us, quantum mechanics took us from classical mechanics, which we associate with Newton, and again, this cause and effect, cut and dried relationship, to a more probabilistic model of nature, where we can say that things behave a certain way most of the time, but it introduces this aspect of uncertainty. We talk about, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle that says that it's impossible to know both um, the velocity and the location of a particle at the same time. And, that's part of that quantum model. So in the quantum model, we have uncertainty associated with where particles are at any particular time. And so the idea is that if we live in a probabilistic universe as opposed to a deterministic one, things can behave differently than we expect them to without breaking the laws of physics, so to speak. So, for example, one manifestation of this could be in the miraculous. Okay, so let's just say, and this is just kind of trying to illustrate how uh, probabilistic modeling would work as opposed to the idea that everything is completely determined. Okay, so let's just say that 99.9999 repeating percent of the time, um, water is liquid at room temperature, or at, say, the temperatures that you might experience on the Sea of Galilee. But it allows for the possibility that something strange could be happening, or unpredictable happening at an atomic or molecular level, that would cause some water to be solid in those conditions. So let's just say that, this enables Jesus to walk on the water. Um, the point being, I'm not saying that that's exactly what happened, but it opens the physical world to the possibility of miracles, or what we would call miraculous or even mysterious, without violating the orderly laws of physics that God set up to govern the interactions between space, time, matter, and energy.
How would that actually work, though? I mean, what would quantum mechanics have to do with water becoming solid? Is that? I mean, this is like way above my pay grade. How would
Well,
that work?
yeah, right. Well, I mean, basically, gets back to what subatomic particles are doing at any point in time, and whether there are bonds that exist or don't. Um, so, I mean, just in simple, chemistry and physical states of matter. I mean, that's a pretty simple example, just from the standpoint that we experience water in three physical phases, right?
Yeah.
And it's not always based just on temperature, but it can be the relationship between volume, pressure, and temperature. And so, like I said, that's actually a pretty basic illustration. Again, I'm not trying to say that that's what Jesus did, but it could be. And I guess the reason I bring that up is that the quantum mechanics understanding of what's going on at a atomic or subatomic level leads to a certain sense of humility that says, look, we don't know for sure that matter behaves this way in a predictable manner. I mean, for the most part, it does, and for the most part, it follows these regular rules and laws. But quantum mechanics introduces this element of uncertainty and humility, in terms of how we understand and what we think we can or can't rule out.
So let's do this. Let's talk about one objection to this whole view, which is there is some science that seems to suggest that maybe God doesn't exist. But I think we've got a little bit of time where we can take some questions from the audience. So we're going to go for a total of about 1 hour. We've been going for about 37 minutes. So if you have a question for Dr. Wickman, then let me know in the live chat right now. I'll try to pull them up, and we'll get to as many questions as we can after we discuss this objection. So the objection is basically that when it comes to the sort of standardly accepted theory about biological diversity, evolution, there's a whole lot of like suffering involved in the evolutionary paradigm, in the theory of evolution. And so if that is what science is sort of suggesting is true, then the question, I suppose, would be, is all of that suffering, is that evidence against a perfect being or a perfect God existing? Because it would seem like if we were just to sit back at the armchair and just think about what would the world be like if there were a perfect being, then like the whole evolutionary process doesn't seem like the first thing that would come to mind. That seems like something that would come to mind way, 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 way down the road. The biblical, or like the biblical, but the young Earth creation model, like where evolution is not the case, where it's just like animals and humans kind of just like came into being, and there's a whole lot less predation. There's not millions of years of predation, and not millions of years of suffering. In some cases, like billions of years could be on different planets, maybe. But yeah. So, anyways, just to put the question out there, Do you
Okay.
think that science provides evidence against God's existence in the form of evolutionary theory?
So no, I don't think so. First of all, let's just talk a little bit about. There's so many different ideas of uh, to what extent evolution may or may not have been a part of getting to biological diversity. You have the idea of microevolution, which is change within a species, and you have macroevolution, which is change between species or across species. Um, you have theistic evolution, which is the idea that perhaps God used elements of evolution to bring about biological diversity on Earth. But there's in all of these models, as well as in a young Earth creation understanding of God's creative work on planet Earth. Um, there's plenty of room for animal suffering in any of these views, just going from one generation of animals to another, with or without change. But my thinking about this whole idea for animal suffering or the problem of evil in general is that it was a necessary possibility given the importance of free will in our relationship with God. And I think that if for me, that's what I kind of focus on as the key point in terms of why there is evil and suffering in the world, is that the free will aspect of our relationship with God, in other words, that we could freely choose whether or not to be in relationship with God, is on us. Is such a key point or a key aspect of how we relate to a loving God, that it was necessary to allow the possibility of evil and suffering to occur through the exercise of human free will. And when it comes to animal suffering through possible evolutionary processes, then that would be part of living in a fallen world that is beset with sin. Um, so I think there are a lot of scholars who've looked at how to go about rationalizing, particularly animal suffering, because of the fact that even if humans have free will, did we bring that suffering upon innocent animals? I know that there are ideas about redemption of all of creation, not just human redemption, but the redemption of all of creation. And I think actually one of the works that you referred to, Cameron, prior to this conversation deals with that pretty thoroughly. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, the idea of free will, I think, is a bit too limited. Well, there's a couple things to say on the whole topic of free will as an explanation for suffering. I have a lot of thoughts on the problem of evil. This is something that I've spent a good deal of time thinking about. I like to think about actually objections to my views a lot more than like the arguments for the existence of God. I tend to think more about the objections to theism. I don't know why I do that, but that's just how my brain works. And so the problem of evil has been something I think about it pretty much every day, actually. And free will, there's a couple things to say about it. So I don't know that it's going to apply to animals, because unless you want to say that animals are free in their choices, which I don't think a lot of people will want to say that, then they're still suffering. And so like what does free will have to do with animal suffering? It seems like there's a disconnect there. That's the first point. And then the second point would be that when it comes to free will, there's an example I use of like giving my son the free will to wield a kitchen knife. Like I would be a bad parent if I did that. And so the question is like, did God give us too much free will in our ability to harm others? And so, like, free will, yeah, it's a good thing, and it can apply in certain circumstances. But is there too much free will in the world? Like, did God give us too much freedom? And so that's for those two reasons, I'm a little bit skeptical of that as a like complete response to the problem of evil. I'm not saying that was your like
No,
complete
I
response,
totally
but
get it. But I also kind of go back to some of the things that have been helpful for me in my journey in kind of the broader area of science and faith, and realizing that things that we used to call a mystery or miraculous, things like, let's just say we had a time traveler that came to the present day from 150 years ago and observed air and space travel, observed various surgical techniques and arthroscopy, endoscopy, use of nanomedicine, nanomachines in medicine, and that sort of thing. I mean, all those things to a person from 150 years ago would look pretty spooky and mysterious. And I think, as we progress, just in terms of human accomplishments and understanding of a better understanding of nature, we see that things that were considered mysterious or miraculous, decades ago, are no longer so mysterious, and we have a better understanding of those things. So when I start looking at some of the astrophysical concepts like string theory and quantum mechanics and multidimensionality and that sort of thing, that the problem of evil has been couched in terms of how could a good God allow so much evil in the world, and those seem to be diametrically opposed to each other, that a loving God would allow so much evil. But perhaps the idea of multidimensionality will help us to understand that those two things might not be as diametrically opposed as we think at first blush. I can't remember the philosopher, whether it might have been C.S. Lewis. I can't remember who it was that brought this up in one of their classic works, but talking about how perhaps physical suffering and death is not the worst evil, that eternal damnation or eternal separation from God is far worse, and perhaps there are things in the suffering that we experience in this life that save us from greater harm or greater suffering. I think, like I said, from my perspective, seeing how multidimensionality allows for things that are not intuitive in the 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time that we experience, I guess, again, brings that level of humility. It's like, okay, maybe there's something that makes these things comport better than we think they do. And I think that's where I still use that word mystery. It's like, yes, it's a mystery, but perhaps we will, as we move to better understand these things better. It's certainly not a full explanation, but I think for me, God endowing us with free will allows that free will loving relationship that we wouldn't have the possibility of if we were all like, pre-programmed robots. And another example that I've used with my students is the idea of, if God were to intervene every time a human being tried to do something bad. Let's just use an example of a person coming into a crowded room with a loaded gun, and their intention is to kill 1 or more people in that room. And let's just say that, that God was operating under the idea that, prevent all evil. And so somehow, he stops the bullet from striking its intended target. Then that divorces the intention of the person with free will from committing the act of free will, and renders free will at least to some extent, meaningless. Um, Again, it's not by any means a full explanation, but I just keep coming back to the free will being such an important part of our relationship with God. And yeah, I mean, I know that we talked about the animal suffering, and again, are they free agents? I mean, I think most animal behaviorists would probably say no, at least not in the same way that humans are. Um, but perhaps there is some future redemption. I know that the author that you forwarded to me, I'm blanking on their name right now, but uh, seems to think that perhaps that's part of the equation is
Yeah.
that animals are
Yeah, Trent
redeemed.
Doherty's book on animal pain is the best book I've read on the problem of evil, hands down. And that's one of that's his basic thesis in the book, is that there's a sort of redemption arc for animals as well. And the soul building theodicy, which we haven't talked about at all, he applies that to animals.
Right.
And so it's a really fascinating view. It's kind of out there, but as you start to think about things more, and you start to think about, well, what could the explanation of animal suffering actually look like? And it may have to involve something like this. And so if
Yeah.
you're a
No,
theist, you may have to adopt it. And if that seems wrong to you, I mean, like you said, reality, and this may be the way that we can kind of work science in here, is that quantum mechanics has taught us that reality is really funky. It's really weird. And so it may be that the true nature of reality is just weird itself too. And so there might be unexpected things that come along with it. And so if I don't know, I think that's a way to work the two into.
Yeah, no, and I think the more you think about these things, I mean, there are no easy answers, and um, I
Yeah, it
think
doesn't matter where you're coming from. There's no easy answer. It's like if
right,
you're a
exactly,
naturalist, where did the universe come from, and why is it so finely tuned? And so there's
right,
every view is going to have problems that they're going to have to work through. And I'm not saying
yeah,
that a
exactly,
naturalist can't come up with explanations, but then the theists can come up with explanations too. And so
yeah,
the difficulty is judging which of these worldviews actually makes the most sense on the whole.
yeah,
And that's
and that brings us to your point prior to the show about abductive reasoning, and
oh yeah, we haven't talked
Alistair,
about that.
yeah, Alistair McGrath, who is a theologian as well as a scientist. He's written a number of books on science and theology, and one of his famous quotes that I've written down, and I have memorialized it myself because I love it so much, is he says something to the effect of, "Do I still have questions? Yes, absolutely, but far fewer than what I'd have without a Christian worldview." In other words, his point is that the Christian worldview makes better sense of all of the evidence from every human endeavor than any other worldview does in terms of putting it all together in a package. Yeah, there's still questions, but not as many.
All right, so let's get to. We've only had a couple questions sent in, but I think it's going to work out for us on time. Here's one from Jeremy Luce, or Lucy Luce. I don't know how to pronounce the last name here. Question: does science disprove the existence of a soul? For example, it seems that the life force of creatures is really from movements of electrons, etc.
That's
Maybe a good time to
interesting.
plug Josh Rasmussen's work on this.
Yeah,
He's
actually, if
currently
you want to go off on that for a second,
Well,
do you?
I just wanted I wanted to plug his work. He's working currently on a book on consciousness, the nature of consciousness, and he doesn't land on dualism. He doesn't land on the view that we have these sort of we are a soul and then we also have a body. So there's two different types of substances. That's not his view, but his view is more like a kind of idealism. But he thinks that basically that consciousness is fundamental and it's based on a whole bunch of different arguments, and we're all sort of waiting on his book that he's currently written already. Is currently in, I think, in the editing phase, and he's going to release it pretty soon here. And I'm going to have him on, obviously, to talk about his book and everything. But since he is a colleague of yours, I figured
Yeah,
it'd be good to at least plug his work here. But
yeah,
yeah,
Josh is a good friend. Yeah, so, but to answer Jeremy's question, I would say no, science does not disprove the existence of the soul. In order to disprove the existence of anything, in fact, I mean, it's kind of, I think misunderstanding of science. In order to disprove the existence of anything, imagine what you'd have to do. You'd have to be God in order to be able to see everything at once, to be able to search out everything at once. I mean, because where is this soul or this other entity that you're trying to disprove hiding, right? So, no, absolutely, science did not disprove the existence of a soul. And it's interesting. I mean, obviously there's a lot of work that's been being done in the area of trying to discover what the soul is and what consciousness is, and is there a locus of it in the brain. And there are a lot of research questions that are explored, but certainly no, the science has not disproved the existence of a soul. But it's certainly an interesting question to explore, I think, not just from the standpoint of science, but also from other fields, including theology and kind of human history, and certainly psychology, and a lot of other fields come to the table for this discussion.
Okay, so one last question, and then we'll close out the interview. This one is from, looks like Father Hugh McKenzie. It says, question for Leslie, where do you get the idea that the first moment of time must have a cause from later moments of time?
Yeah, so the first moment of time, I don't actually know that we specifically said time. I think we were referring to the universe itself. And certainly time is in some sense, a human construct. It's hard to deny that it's useful, but time itself is the forward flow of events, right? So, the way I kind of structure this, and I'm not sure we have a whole lot of time to unpack this, but we have the human existence, or the physical space and time existence of the universe on a linear timeline that is a forward flow of events within the physical universe. My kind of model of what existence is outside of this is what I would call eternity, where God resides. And from that outside perspective, you can look into the timeline, you can observe the forward flow of human events. But outside of that physical timeline that the universe proceeds along is eternity, which is timeless. But the idea of the beginning to the universe, the physical universe, is one that the Big Bang model points toward, because of the expansion that we observe in the universe as it's currently happening, and then basically taking that idea and running it backwards, if you will, to a beginning point. So, yeah, I mean, just as with any theory, there's some speculation involved, and certainly, and that's the other thing I think I'd like to maybe close with is this kind of misunderstanding of science. And it gets back to your comment about abductive reasoning too, and that what we're really doing in science is we're looking for the best possible explanation that fits the evidence that we currently have. It's not ever finished, right? We're not looking for a black and white airtight case. In fact, that's the way science progresses, is we come up with these tentative explanations that fit the evidence, all the while knowing that we may have to change or tweak or completely discard the current theory, the current explanation, as new evidence comes to light. So again, science is not deductive in terms of proceeding from one truth to another, but rather inductive and abductive, in that you're trying to make sense of the current set of evidence.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think that's going to do it for us today. Is there anything, I mean, we've kind of touched on, I feel like, a lot of different points of the book, and so I feel we've done a good job of not only kind of going over some of the main points, but just I want you guys to pick it up. God of the Big Bang by Leslie Wickman. And this has been a lot of fun, but I did want to ask, is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to discuss? We've got about maybe 1 more minute. But is there anything that you wanted to touch on that we haven't touched on?
Oh, we didn't talk about life in space, and I'm not sure we can do that justice in 1 minute. But
well, just answer this. Just answer it yes or no. Is there life on other planets?
Oh wow, that's not a yes or no question. I'll leave it with I hope so.
Okay.
And we'll follow up on another conversation.
Okay, yeah. So if you'd like to see Dr. Wickman back to talk about life on other planets, then let me know in the comments and maybe we can make that happen. But Leslie, it's been great to have you here. This has been a great conversation, and I can't wait to maybe have another one with you.
Perfect. That'd be a lot of fun. I've enjoyed it too. Thanks, Cameron.
All right, and we'll see you guys in the next Capturing Christianity video. Remember that Christianity is true. See you later. Hey, it's me again. Actually, don't leave yet. I've got something super, super important to tell you. So first of all, you're awesome. Like you just watched a really, really long video just now, and you're still watching it. That is actually pretty amazing. Secondly, we have hundreds, literally hundreds of other apologetics related videos for you to watch on our channel. Go check them out. I've interviewed exorcists, hosted debates between Christians and atheists. I've even made response videos to atheists. All of that is available on our channel. Go check it out. Third, I rely on people that see value in my work, people like you that watch videos to the very end, to keep the lights on around here. Literally, this is how I feed my family. So if you see value in the work that I do, please consider supporting this ministry and becoming a patron. Links to that are in the description. Oh, and have I mentioned that Christianity is true?